Good morning, everyone. It looks like a beautiful day here in Stockholm. Hope it's the same for all of you. My name is Maria Izzo, as Johan just said, and I am at the moment the Vice President of Product at Acast, but I have been working in different roles previously at iSettle and Schibsted here in Sweden. And I'm going to give you a little introduction about some ideas that you can keep in mind when you want to set up a startup with a good focus on teams and on tools that your teams can use. So I guess I will start now the presentation, and fingers crossed it starts the right way, because sometimes it doesn't. So let me share my screen. Exactly as I suspected. There we go.
Great. Just one question, Maria, before you start.
Yes.
Questions. If the participants have any questions, do you want them afterwards or during the session? Should we just unmute ourselves and like, hello, I have a question, like?
Yeah, I would say as a general rule, let's keep everyone muted, and well, let's take it as it goes. If you have questions, just stop me and I'll answer the question. If it gets long, we can take it at the end of the session. I would say generally, yes, yeah. Interrupt me anytime you want.
Cool.
All right. So I'll give you, so this session was supposed to be one session, but it turned out that I have so much content to share that it's actually going to be 2 parts. So during today's session, we will explore 3 important things about lean leadership in a startup, and which are tools and needs for effective teams, team culture, and ways of working. While in the next session, which we haven't set a date for yet, but we'll share more, Johan will share more in Slack. In the next session, we'll focus instead on conflict management, diversity of thinking, and continuous improvement. Let's get started on this part, and we begin with tools and needs of effective teams. Advice that I feel like giving after having worked in some startups is that usually when a startup is young, there are some cornerstones that as a founder you want to ensure to make sure that your teams work effectively. And these cornerstones, I can't pronounce these words today, are the ability to strike the right balance between content and process, and we will dig deep into these both elements, and also the ability to cater to your team's basic needs, because teams are made of people and people are human beings, and we all have the same basic needs. Let's get started with content and process. What happens when someone is extremely excited about something new, like a startup, for instance, is that there is a big focus on the what. What should we do? And what is the content of what we do? However, there are other elements that need to be kept in mind, which are the why, the where to, the what, and the how. And these are questions that all teams need answers to in order to be able to work effectively. And as I said, the easiest trap sometimes is that when you are into doing mode, you focus a lot on the what, and you lose focus on the other elements, on the why, where to, what, and how. And in this next slide, we can, of course, my computer is not helping me. So in this slide, we can see how it looks like. So the what and the what is the content of what you do. So what we will work on and what are the competences that we need. And it's extremely important to take time to explore this element together, because very often especially when you have new teams, people that have never worked in an industry, or people that are just out of university, out of school, and they have never worked at all, they really don't know what they're working for or what they're working towards. So getting everyone on the same page and building this ability to constantly keep everyone on the same page, so being able to review the reason, or better, the content of what you're working on, is absolutely fundamental. However, the focus on this may remove focus on these other 3 elements, which are the why, which is the purpose. What is your goal as a team? Without a purpose, you don't know where you don't know why you're doing whatever you're doing. You don't know why you're producing the products you're producing. And this is the reason why the team and the product exists. So this should be crystal clear from day one. Every time you start up a new venture, every time you set up a new team and you want to build good team practices, you have to start from why. Otherwise, you don't know where you're going, or better, what is the outcome that you want to achieve. And the where is also another important element, because these are the outcomes that you want to achieve. And if the outcome is not well understood, so if you have a good purpose but you don't know what the outcome of that purpose is, the risk is that you have a fake idea of what reality is. And finally, we have another element, which is the how, which is also equally important as the process, because as I said before, we're all humans. We have different needs and we have different preferences for the way we communicate, the way we collaborate, especially in times like this where collaboration has become virtual and very much non-physical. There's a lot of elements that get lost in the remote relationship. So there are very different ways of dealing with the physical space around you, with the processes around you, and being able to work with the how, so how you do things, especially in the beginning of a team, it gives you the possibility to increase the effectiveness of your team tenfold if you balance it together with the content. So if you always keep an eye on what you're doing, but never forget that how you're doing things can change with reality, can change with different people that you have on the team, and can change also when people leave the team, when people join the team dynamics can change drastically. So it's always important to keep a good balance of these two elements and to set the why and the where to at the very beginning of whatever venture you're embarking. When it comes to needs, I mentioned before, yes, we're human beings, we have needs, we have basic needs that need to be met in order for us to feel safe, to feel happy, to feel productive. And this applies both in your private life as much as it applies in your professional life. And since as human beings, we have the psychological side of things is usually very heavy and drives most, or if not all, of our decisions, and the social nature of our way of being is also a big element of this condition. We need to always consider that the needs that have a psychological and a social background need to be catered for, because they have a big impact on how the teams work and how the dynamics evolve. And sometimes there can be some hindering behaviors in teamwork that come up, that arise because some of the basic needs have not been met. So if we think of psychological and social needs, we can think of people's basic needs to bond, people's basic needs to feel included in choices, and so on. And if these needs are not met, if someone is feeling excluded, if someone is feeling like they're not involved, or they can't be heard, they can express their opinion, that will cause friction, that will cause stress, anxiety, disengagement, and eventually churn, as it happens, especially in new teams. If we look at this model here, it's called Fyra, which stands for Fundamental Interpersonal Relations Model. And it is a theory that it's quite old theory. It's been introduced in the 50s by William Schutz. And however, it's still very current, because it is a basic model and basic matrix that divides the core needs of group relationships into three basic ones: the need for inclusion, control, and affection. And it also sees the two sides of them, because you can see each one of these needs from two different perspectives: the perspective of when the need is expressed and the perspective of when the need is wanted. So if we focus on the first one, on inclusion, which is basically the need for involvement, this is the inner drive to establish and maintain satisfactory relationships with people with respect to interaction and association. So what happens if my need for inclusion is, when my need for inclusion is expressed, it means that is the degree to which I include other people in my activities. So if I'm not really good at expressing the way I include others in my activities, others can be affected by that. And on the opposite side, if I want to be included, then that will show. So the degree to which I want others to include me in their activities will be the other side of the medal. So it would be the wanted face of the need for inclusion. And the same can apply to other needs. So you have the need to control and the need to be controlled. And by controlled, I mean influenced, and not necessarily controlled in the strict term of things. And of course, there is also the need for affection, which is the most basic one, because that's, as humans, we're sociable. Without affection, without feeling like we belong, without having the possibility to express and let others express openness and connection, the risk is that people don't really bond, don't really share their ideas. There's no innovation that can come out of relationships that are lacking deeply one of these three basic needs. And if we move, so basically what we need to be careful as leaders whenever we build a team is that we always make sure that the need for inclusion, control, and affection, both in terms of expressed and wanted need, are catered for, and people are free to both express themselves but also express their need for something. So there shouldn't be, ideally in an ideal team, everybody should be able to both feel included and make sure that if someone is not being included, express themselves and say, you know what, I think this person is not being included and we should do something about it. So this is in an ideal world. Moving on to the second part of this presentation, we will be looking into three elements that help startups very much establish their core. So whenever you found a startup, you are the founder, you have your own background, you have your own experience, and you set a culture that reflects your values. So whenever you set up your team culture, it is important that as a founder, you do put most of your values into it. However, you have to always make sure that those values keep constantly relevant, and they keep constantly adapting or adjusting to whatever reality you face. So if you onboard new people on your team that have different values, that have different backgrounds, and that work in different ways, you have to make sure that you're able to guarantee that there is coordination whenever you work together, that there is alignment, but also that the teams are autonomous and they're not always told what to do. And hopefully, ideally, the best way to implement these two first elements is to make sure that you implement them within your area of influence. And we will get there in the upcoming slides. So when it comes, so there are the three main parts, as I said. The first part is coordination versus synchronization. So what does that mean? In the world, there's chaos, and usually we tend, especially in business, we tend to put structures to dominate that chaos and to put order in it. What happens though is that sometimes when, as I was saying before, when you're a founder, you put all of your values, all of your beliefs, all of your fundamental core values into your company. So what can happen is that it's super easy to set up already from scratch very strict rules, especially if you have background in a corporate dimension. It can come very easy to set up some very strict structures and processes that can work for a team that has been working together for a certain time, that have built a certain level of intimacy together. However, these rules might be not ideal when the team is within a startup, because within a startup, everybody does a lot of different things and maybe are not in their role description. Maybe they have never done before. Maybe they're learning how to do on the go. So it is preferable, especially in early stages of companies and when teams are small or not very intimate, it is preferable to focus more on letting them do what they can do best. If you hire someone, you're not hired them to tell them what to do. You hire them to let them tell you what's necessary. So make sure that you give direction as a leader, and you empower them to make their own decisions based on their competence. So there's this sentence that keeps ringing in my head every time I think of this, which is let chaos reign and then reign in the chaos. So when you start a new team, at first, observe the dynamics. Make sure that you don't impose too many structures and too many processes in already at the early stages, but see what the team looks like and what they prefer in terms of how they work and in terms of how they synchronize and the way how they coordinate. And if we look specifically at these 2 points, coordination and synchronization, we can, I don't know if anyone has ever seen this illustration before. It's pretty much everywhere. I've seen it in a lot of different presentations, and it basically shows 2 different setups. You have the loose coordination model and the tight synchronization model. So can anyone tell me what difference do you see in these 2 different models? And this is the time when someone can unmute and tell me something if you want, of course. I don't know. I guess that there are no questions, so I will continue. But basically, what we see here is what we see up here that looks like chaos is actually the ideal setup when you start a team from scratch, because this is keeping coordination, but keeping it loose, so not giving very strict rules, very strict processes in the beginning, can span very creative ideas and can be the ideal setup for a startup, because you don't necessarily need to have everything in sync. Like if you look at tight synchronization, what I imagine when I look at this is a business that has been established. So it's I don't know, a factory, or maybe a very well established corporation where there is a very clear hierarchy. People have worked together for a very long time. There's a lot of governance implemented and policies and whatnot, and everybody knows how to act and what to do at the same time, so that the chain of production never stops, if we want to put it that way. However, in a startup, since you don't have all of the skills that you need on the team, or better, you might have all of the skills that you need, but you might not have all of the roles that you need in the very beginning. It is good to keep coordination loose, as long as there's coordination. So as long as everybody can always know what everybody else is doing, without hopefully avoiding double work, avoiding overlaps, avoiding conflicts, as long as everybody can understand where the others are going and what they're doing, then the first drawing is definitely an ideal scenario for a startup, for a young team in a startup. Sorry. So however, when we look at coordination, we also have to think of the degree of autonomy, because there can be resilience to uncertainty when teams are extremely aligned around the purpose and the goal, and they can respond to solve a problem with high levels of autonomy. However, in such a scenario, ideally every member of the team is a leader. So that means that there is trust. That means that there is the possibility to express yourself and to express your competence and to express your disagreement when necessary. And this responsibility allows and enables teams to take action and be proactive. So in this specific slide, we look at the fact that teams are empowered to work with high autonomy and in alignment with their purpose and goals, and they're able to handle the unexpected, but they respond quickly to change, and they find innovative solutions to all the new challenges. So I guess the next illustration will represent this better. So this is a slide that has been created by Henrik Nyberg, who is an Agile coach at Crisp, which is a consultancy company based here in Stockholm. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the comic book Dilbert, but this is the typical, in the Dilbert comic book, this is the boss, the typical boss that is authoritative, that tells people what to do, that micromanages them, and that never listens to what the team actually has to say. So if we look at this graph, we can see that we have 4 quadrants. And if we start with and we have both the 2 elements, alignment and autonomy. When in a team where there is low alignment and low autonomy, what you have is a leadership that is focused on micromanaging, and the team has a culture of indifference. They don't care. If someone is there to tell me exactly what to do, why did they hire me? What is my competence worth in this organization? So that means that I have no possibility to take my own initiative as a team member. And at the same time, I don't even really care to communicate to the other members of my team what I'm working on. So there's no alignment, because who cares? There's someone else that is going to always tell me what to do. On the same low end of the graph, but on the low alignment and high autonomy quadrant, we have a typical startup setup. So you have that you have an entrepreneurial mindset. So the leader really doesn't strive for alignment. It doesn't really care much for what everybody's doing. He's trusting that someone will do what they're supposed to do. So people have a lot of autonomy, but they're not given direction. So what happens is that there is a little chaos, and it's fine in the very beginning, but then the team needs to work together with the leader towards building those tools that will enable them to align. If we look at this quadrant here, in my opinion, it's like the riskiest of the scenarios, because you have an authoritative organization, so there is a lot of alignment. People are extremely synchronized. However, people don't express themselves. They don't have the opportunity to express their competence. They don't have the opportunity to be creative, to be innovative, because they are told not only what to do, but also how to do it. The ideal scenario where every team should strive to be is this one up here, where teams have both high alignment and high autonomy. In that case, the leader is exposing a problem. Say, for instance, here we see we need to cross the river, figure out how. So I, as a leader, am telling you, team, we have this problem. You are the experts. Find the best solution, solves this problem, as long as we are all aligned and you are in total autonomy to make your own decisions as a team and as experts. Because the important thing to always remember is that when you hire someone on a team, you're hiring them because of their competency. If you're telling them what to do, that means that either you know more than they do in their field, or perhaps you might want to step back a little bit and give them some space, because that will enable them to create things that, just because they have been given trust, they have been given autonomy, and they align with the rest of the team, they can bring up the real value out of what you're producing, out of what you are putting out in the market. Moving on, let's talk about influence and control. So teams, as well as every single human being, can't control everything, and usually when they try to react and change what is out of their control, they risk to burn out. And this is a very risky, it's a very tricky balance, because knowing what you are in control of is not always obvious. Sometimes you need to work through to what you really think you're in control of, to what it is necessary for you to be in control of, and what you actually are not in control of. And the thing is, when a team, or in general, when a human is able to focus, on where there is the possibility to have the most impact. So if a team is able to understand what they're in control of, they can get the most value out of that. And they can keep their focus and their energy within their sphere of influence. That way, it's going to be easy for them to focus on what is needed, on what is necessary, and to remove focus from things that are not priority, from things that are not core business, for things that are not important. If we look at this graphic here, we have a theory that is the theory of the circles of influence and concern. And it basically represents two different types of people. You have the reactive people and proactive people. Reactive people tend to spend time and energy on reacting to issues that they cannot control. So if we look at this first set of circles, we have the inner circle, which is the circle of influence. Circle of influence is the things in your life or around you that you can actually control, that you're in control of. So where you live, where you work, what you read, what you buy, they're all decisions that you as a person can make and can influence. You can decide to move to another apartment. You can decide to work for a different company. You can just drop the book you're reading now and read a new one, etc., etc. However, around them, there are other elements. Around everyone, there are other elements that are within our concerns. Or these are things that we think of. There are things that happen around us, but that we cannot control. And the examples are, economy, disasters, wars, weather, natural political views of others, etc., etc. So the difference between a reactive person and a proactive person, which is a person that instead spends time and energy focusing on issues that can be controlled by them, is that a reactive person has a very small circle of concern, has a very large circle of concern and a very small circle of influence. A proactive person, on the contrary, has exactly the opposite. So what they do is that they focus more on the things that they can influence, and they only spend their energy and time on those. And whatever is out here in the outer circle, in the circle of concern, they simply don't care, because it's really not their concern. So whenever you realize that within your team there are some tensions due to the fact that there is a lack of focus and people don't know exactly what is priority and what is not, what is important and what is not, you can sit down with them and do this exercise. Just draw these two circles and put inside in the inner circle all of the things that you are in control of, and then in the outer circle all of the things that you are not in control of. And then once you have identified the things that you believe you are in control of as a team, you have to ask your question: is it really necessary for this thing to be within my circle of influence? What happens if I don't focus on this specific thing? Could it be something that belongs to circle of concern, or should it be something that stays within my area of influence? And And once you have identified that, you can then, you can have control over the things that you can actually influence. If it's hard for you as a leader, or if it's hard for you as a leader as a part of a team, to identify what you are in control of, ideally you should ask for help. You should seek for a facilitator or for a coach, for someone that can help you understand what is within the focus of your business. Because if you don't know what within your business you can influence, the risk is that you're producing something that the market will not be interested in. So this exercise is really powerful, and it's really easy to do. And the ideal situation would be to have to do it with a third party that is not within your team, that can facilitate communication and really ask the tough questions and analyze every single element that you put in that circle and ask you, okay, is this really worth your attention? Is this really worth your energy and your focus? Moving on to the third part of this presentation, which means that we're getting close to the end, which means I'm also almost on time. There are, the third part of this presentation is about ways of working. And when we work in a complex world, in a world like this that is complex, we need to be responsive, and we need to be able to pivot as we go. So if we plan everything ahead and follow through that plan, and we don't do reality checks as things develop, as life goes on, the risk that we run is that we have planned for something that meanwhile has changed, and we will not deliver what the market really wants. So ideally, a great team leader is able not only to design effective team processes that lead you towards this constant fact check with reality, but also redesign them as you go, depending on how the team changes, depending on circumstances change, and depending on how, in general, the world and the markets go. So if we move on, this is exactly what I just talked about. There, in an environment of uncertainty and change, teams need methods and approaches to collaborate while being coordinated without necessarily being synchronized. So such approaches enable quick feedback loops and highlight pivot opportunities. And of course, the key elements to make these approaches work are inclusiveness, participation, creativity, responsiveness, and adaptability. So the team needs to be empowered to be able to do all of these things, to be creative, to participate, to express their opinion, to identify threats and opportunities and respond to them, hopefully in a proactive way rather than a reactive way. So ideally, you should see problems coming rather than be hit by them. And if we look at this slide, we see so now I'm going to show you, I'm going to give a preview of this and the next one. We have waterfall planning versus agile planning. So waterfall planning has been dominating the industries, most businesses in the past 30 years very heavily. And what happens during waterfall planning is the work is all planned out at the start of the project. So here you have a very long planning cycle. You gather everyone in the company, put all the brains there. You have this huge plan, and ideally you lay it into a Gantt chart, which are these charts that show you timelines and they give you deadlines on every phase of the work you are planning to do has a specific deadline that's defined ahead of time. What happens though is that when you have a long planning cycle, if you start developing something that you have planned for, and there is an opportunity to actually pivot and change your plan, you won't be able to do that because the plan has all been decided here in the very beginning. So as you go, you miss an opportunity to pivot. You continue according to plan, but you don't really achieve the goal that you were hoping you would in the beginning, because the rigidity of this kind of process means that the team will miss opportunity, is more likely to follow an incorrect path, simply because while you're doing all of this, the requirements that you have gathered here when you planned have changed. If instead you apply a more agile and a leaner way of approaching reality, then you won't miss this pivot opportunity. You will change what you're doing. You will change your plan on the go. You will test. You will get feedback. You will evaluate whether that feedback was valuable or not to you. And based on the feedback you receive, you can you can stick to the plan if you think you're still going on the right path, or you can change completely your plan and actually achieve something in the future. So the difference between waterfall and agile planning is that in the agile planning model, work is, as you can see, we had a continuous line that would go towards a planned goal. And here instead, it's more chaotic. You have a lot of different turns and flips and changes of direction. And the Agile way of working is basically splitting your planning cycles into very small sprints. And each sprint has a clear focus, and each sprint ends at a point where a decision has to be made. So let's say that your team works in bi-weekly sprints. So you have a first cycle. Here you plan for 2 weeks, you deliver something, and then you look at the market, you test, you learn something, you see if the test you have run is successful or not. If it is successful, you continue on your way. If it is not successful, you pivot, you plan for something else, you scrape whatever you have done, try new ideas, test them, replan, try new ideas, test them. This way you will never risk to plan a lot ahead and deliver something that is not in line with what the reality is. If I am delivering this chunk of work today, I test it against my users. I see how users respond. If there's no good response, I should not continue that way, because it means that it's really not something that my users need, my customers need. So I should try something different. So by testing and learning and pivoting, you can actually, in a non-linear but quite organized way, achieve success in an Agile way.
Here I have a question here, Maria.
Yes.
So and we've been on this touched this subject before, and I've experienced it myself. So when you do this testing in a lean leadership way, who do you think will be in control of that decision, if to pivot or not?
Ideally, it should be the whole team,
or is it the whole team? So you have worked with the whole team, like, and how do you come to that decision if you're gonna pivot or not?
That's a very good question. So ideally, it should be a team decision. So the leader, of course, has owns the big picture. However, the team are the ones that you have hired as expert to tell you, or to deliver things for the benefit of your company. So ideally, it should be a team decision. And these team decisions usually happen in a very natural way if you set up an Agile way of working within your team. Because if you have very short cycles, today you plan for the upcoming week, let's say, and then during the week you ship something, and then you test how it went, and then you look at the test and you see, okay, is this something that our customers are actually appreciating? And everybody will have their different point of view depending on the skills you have. A developer will have an opinion, while an analyst will have a different opinion, a product owner will have a different one, etc., etc. And then together, during a you can run retrospectives every time you do a test. So you look at what went well and what did not go well, and you evaluate, okay, how can we adjust the course of what we had planned towards a different direction, so that we don't risk to produce something or to ship something that actually is not relevant for the customers we have. But ideally, it's the whole. It should be the whole team.
Yeah, cool. And then I have, like, it comes a follow-up question here, but like you said in the beginning of a startup, you have often some very great people on board, but you don't have all the roles. How important do you think it is that everybody in the team can do sales to understand what you actually are doing? That is something that I have experienced, that like, based that decision that we were talking about, pivot or not, here is pretty much if you find product market fit. And if you're gonna find product market fit, you must know what the customer or the user wants. So basically, the question I think I'm asking is, how important do you think it is to do sales for the whole team in the beginning if you don't have all the roles, as you said?
Okay, well, that's another good question. I think that the answer depends on what kind of company you have. If it's services, if it's like tangible products, if it is something that has a heavy regulation in the market or not. So that really, the answer, there's no one answer. But ideally, more than doing sales, ideally everyone in a business should understand sales. Like, it is part of one of the slides that I showed before, the one with the how, the what, to and why. So the why is what is telling you what is the reason why we're doing things? And that is the basics of sales. Like, you can't sell something if you don't understand how it works, if you don't understand what the need that it's going to satisfy is. So ideally, in a company, everyone should understand the sales mindset, not necessarily do sales, because to understand the needs of a customer doesn't necessarily mean that you're selling them something, but you should be able to help your sales team sell better by better understanding the needs of your customers. So depending on the role you have in the startup, of course, you can do both, especially in the beginning. So if you're a team of 3, of course, everyone is going to do everything. But if, let's say, you are a back-end developer, you're not really accustomed to selling. So you might not want to, you wouldn't feel comfortable going to people and trying to sell them something, but you could feel comfortable helping your colleague go and sell by giving them the right specs on what the product should do, or what the product should resolve in terms of problems.
Yeah, that's
so
great.
it's
That's great also. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we're really close to the end of the presentation. So at this point, if there are any questions, we might directly take them at the finishing line. Okay, so if everything is clear on, and this is like a very high level agile planning, we can get into detail in further sessions, but right now I'm keeping really high level. So if we finally look, so I will go one slide back because I would like for you to put focus on this cycle. So this cycle is, as we said, a cycle where you plan tasks, you prioritize them, you adjust them, you test them, you learn something, and then you decide whether it's the case to pivot or to continue according to plan. So this cycle here can of course be applied to the way you deliver your product to the market, but it can also be applied to the way you implement your way of working. So if you keep a team adaptive and lean and able to prototype different approaches, not only to ship their work, but also to identify the best way in which they work, you can apply the same mindset of testing, reflecting on what you've done different, learning, testing again, and adjusting, and and shifting your mindset from reactive to how things are to proactively change things the way you want them. So if we look at this visual here, there are different methodologies that you can test to support the learning, measuring, and building model. But this one specifically is the build, measure, learn feedback loop, and it's used in the lean startup. It's the lean startup model. So basically, you can apply this both to the production of your product, so the delivery of your product, but also to the way you work. So let's say that your team is working in a waterfall way, and you want to shift to and try a different framework, a different approach. So you sit down, you come up with ideas, and then you quickly implement those ideas. And then you collect data. You give yourself a time to analyze to keep that idea going. You then collect data about how your test went, and you evaluate, has this been useful? Has this not been useful? And depending on that, you can either stick to the idea you already have implemented because it's working, or you change and you test a new idea. I'll give you an example. When I started as working as the automation lead at Izzo, I had a team of people that had never worked together before. They were some of them were already part of the company, some others came from the outside, but none of them had ever worked in the same team. We were all coming from different teams. So what happened was, the first thing that we asked ourselves is, okay, how do we work? We are not only people that come from different backgrounds, but we are also sitting in different nations. Some of us were in Sweden, some others were in Scotland. So it was a constant remote relationship. So we tried a lot of different ways of working, and we tested them. We gave ourselves a time and said, okay, we tried this model for 6 weeks. And after 6 weeks, we evaluate how we worked. We evaluate how we felt, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a quantitative evaluation. It can also be a qualitative evaluation. You can just ask around, how do you feel? How have you felt during the last 6 weeks compared to how you felt before? And you evaluate. If people haven't been feeling better, perhaps you should not go for that model you've tried. You can try something else. And the same principles can be applied, of course, to code delivery. So you can come up with you do some brainstorming, you do some, I don't know if, I think you are all familiar with the concept of design sprint, because I know that there has been another presentation about it previously. But basically, you sit down with your team, you prototype something, you come up with an idea, you implement it in a very minimum viable way, and then you give it some time, you collect data, you look at the data, and you verify whether, you measure whether that idea was actually giving you some value or not. If it is giving you value, continue on that idea, build on top of it. If it is not giving you value, scrape it. It's really hard sometimes to get rid of ideas that you have come up with, that you believe are successful. However, data is showing you something different. And that is the biggest, I think, that is the biggest gift that a startup founder can give their team, the ability to step back when data is showing that the original idea of something is not actually going the way they wanted it to go. It's really hard. It takes a lot of self-control and exercise, but it is, if you really want the best for your company, then you should really be data-driven. You should always test, you should always measure, you should always be open to changing completely the direction towards which you're going, if that's necessary for the success of your company, of course. Finally, this is the homework slide. If any of the content that I have proposed so far has inspired you in any way, you want to try it on, then there are 3 exercises that you could do together with your team. And I will share this. I will share them with Johan so that Johan can share with everybody, and you can look back at this slide. But basically, you can test together with your team. You can observe how you. Where do you put your focus at the moment? Do you put it more on content? Do you put it more on process? And what do you need in order to balance that relation between content and model? And process. Another exercise you could do with your team is to identify your circles. I see that there is a chat. I don't know how to. There we go. There's a link. Another exercise you can do is identifying your circles of influence and concern. And if you realize that you can't really identify what is within your circle of influence, you can always ask a third party, a neutral party that ideally is not involved in your business, to facilitate that exercise and come up with uncomfortable ideas, so that you can identify what you actually are in control of and what you can influence proactively with your efforts. And another exercise you can do, of course, and I believe it's one of the principal exercises that every team should do, especially in their early stages, is to evaluate as a leader, what is the role that your culture is playing in the daily routines of your team and in the way they work every day, and try and understand how can you leverage the value the values that you live by, and the kind of culture that you want to implement in your company, as a way to make your team even more effective. So how can you align your values as an individual with the values of the company, and make sure that the people you hire are aligned with those values as well, and they are actually evangelizing those values inside the company, but also outside of the company. The more people identify with the purpose of your business, the more in line their values are with your companies. And when there is that connection between a person and the purpose of a company and the mission of a company, then there is natural, to go back to your question, Ewan, there is a natural sales process that doesn't really require too much effort. Because if I believe in something, it's going to be super easy for me to promote it everywhere I go, with everyone I talk to. And yes, that was it for me. I'm 15 minutes late, and I apologize about that. It's first time, and
that was great, Maria. That was great. Big applause. Cool, really. So, do we have any questions? And you can just unmute yourself and shout out. I can start with one question I have. So today in these crazy times, what tools do you use at Acast to be able to keep this productive way of working at the same level?
So Acast in a way has a natural advantage when it comes to reacting to coronavirus, because Acast has as a core value remote first, which means that we have structured the company since the very beginning to be able to welcome anyone from anywhere in the world. And we live like the sun never sets on Acast, because we cover all of the time zones from Australia to Portugal, and we make it work. So of course we use the same tools that we are using right now. We use tools like Zoom or Google Hangouts or Whereby. There's several different collaboration tools. We use Slack, and we use one important tool that I think is very relevant for remote teams is the so creativity usually comes out of free expression of thinking. So what you usually do, maybe if you have an idea and you want to express to someone that idea, you use a whiteboard, you draw something, or you sketch something on a piece of paper. So finding a tool that allows you to remotely do that exercise can help people share ideas better. And that's what, like, we use we use a tool called Myra, but there are so many. There's Google Sketch, there's plenty of tools that can help you with that. And what we have done specifically in this time is basically creating occasions where people can just hang out without talking about. So work talk is banned, because when you're in an office, you take time to take a coffee, you meet people on the corridor, you go out to have lunch together. When you're constantly remote, constantly at home, you never have time to even probably go to the bathroom. So we have created spaces within the day where we can just drop into a hangout and talk about anything but work. And that is really giving a good vibe.
Like a virtual coffee room. Kind of.
Basically, yes. And of course, like this, in times like this, what we have put the most focus on is to make sure that the rituals of, so we work Agile, of course, and the rituals that we have in place, so stand-ups, retros, requirement gathering and fact-checking reality with stakeholders, and the connection with stakeholders is really tight. So we make sure that we never skip a meeting, that we never skip a stand-up. We do our best to, if we can't make it, to share knowledge beforehand so that we don't hinder the team when they need information. And we're being basically extremely thorough about following these cycles. So we never skip a cycle, because if you do it once, then it's super easy to just go down the landslide of, okay, we didn't do it last week, it went well, we can skip it this week as well. And then you lose touch with your planning.
Great. So yes, anyone with a question? Otherwise, I would say a big thank you to you, Maria.
Thank you. And if you, I know that this context is a bit, sometimes you don't want to ask questions, especially if you record it, but if you have any questions and you want to Slack me, feel free. I'm on Slack pretty much all day. So feel free to shoot questions there. Yeah.
Cool. So great session. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody that was participating, and see you at Slack or the next session that I will come out with information about that as soon as possible. So thank you for today, everybody, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.